Good evening, everybody. Reverend Clive Potter of Milford Parish Church has sent his apologies as he's been called away elsewhere. So in his absence, I hope that we can focus on this agenda and consider all its items with good grace. And welcome to all of you and welcome to members of the public to this evening's council meeting. Members, please raise your hands if you want to speak, and you'll be operating your own microphones. If you're unable to hear, please indicate. We will be live streaming, or we are live streaming this meeting tonight. Speeches will be timed at 4 minutes, and you will be given a 30-second warning before your time finishes. You are asked to speak only once on each item, except in limited circumstances as set out in Procedure Rule 14.6. This evening, instead of taking votes by a show of hands, we will be using the electronic voting system, using your consoles which are in front of you. When a vote is called for, they will light up and you will be able to vote. The green sticker signifies the in favour for vote. Abstain is the amber in the middle, which I think is yellow. And against is the red one on the right. Okay, so I hope that's clear. And if there's a need for a recorded vote, we will do that via a roll call in the normal way. And if members are happy to agree a recommendation by general assent, we will do that in the usual way. Agenda item number 1 is apologies for absence. Fiona, are there any?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've had apologies from councillors Carol Coburn, Andrew Law and Michaela Wicks.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is the minutes of the council meetings held on the 23rd of May and the 7th of June. Does anyone have any issue with the accuracy of these minutes, which have been circulated by email and which are on the table at the back of the council chamber? Please indicate if you approve the minutes. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Fiona, are there any?
None received before the meeting, Mayor.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is the Mayor's announcements, and I just have a very short announcement or words. Since we last met and on your behalf, I have addressed the Ahmadiyya community, attended various community events, including the Milford Village Show and the Cranley Carnival, met Princess Anne, opened the Godalming burial service, funeral service, and with Mark Foster and Colin Jackson, reopened all 4 of Waverley's leisure centres. The Pride flag has flown outside this building for the entire month of June. And not forgetting the civic service held in St John's Parish Church, Farncombe, a wonderful occasion, thanks to the work of our Waverley councillor, Waverley officer Chloe, and to all who contributed with their time and their talents. I have to say there was one question raised on the day by various people in the church. They said, where are all the councillors? There are 50 of us. And on that day, including Councillor Paul Rivers and myself, there were 14. 3 gave apologies. That makes 17 out of 50. That's not half. So could do better. And I hope that many more of you will support the mayoral fundraising events. And the first one of those is Friday, October the 6th. Agenda item number 5, leaders' announcements. Leader, have you any?
Yes, indeed, Madam Mayor, and good evening. Good evening, Madam Mayor, good evening, members of the council, and welcome to the members of the public in the gallery. I have a small number of announcements and comments to make under this item of the agenda to update on events and issues since the last council meeting. First of all, as you've alluded, I was honoured to join you, Madam Mayor, at your wonderful civic service in the heart of your community in Farncombe. A highlight for me has to be the look on Reverend Rash's face when he remembered that he had needed to follow the Jamaican tradition of blessing the cake. But it was a lovely event, and I was very pleased to be there, along with a number of people in this room. Secondly, we've all this week had to absorb the information coming out of Guildford Borough Council regarding their financial situation. I have had several meetings with the Guildford leadership over the last couple of weeks, and indeed both executives have met as a group as well. And I wanted to reassure members here of a number of things, including some immutable facts that sometimes get lost in the discussions. We are separate councils with separate accounts. And I also think it's fair to say that although the scale of the issues in Guildford are a little larger than was perhaps expected, the issues themselves were not of particular surprise to anybody and were certainly factored into our own risk assessments on this side of the collaboration. Now, our joint work with Guildford continues to save us hundreds of thousands of pounds per annum, and we will be returning to the next steps on that journey in September after we've properly absorbed the details of their financial issues. Now, whilst this is nothing like the scale of Woking, I would remind those who are opposed to collaboration that unless the government and the Chancellor in particular start to properly address the crisis in local government funding, this is but the tip of the iceberg. The pace of councils issuing Section 114 notices or starting urgent remediation works, as Guildford has done, is increasing nationwide, and particularly within the southeast of England. Net debt for the districts and boroughs in Surrey plus the county council itself is now in excess of £5.5 billion. Obviously, at least £1.5 billion of that figure is currently Woking. For comparison, Waverley has a debt of £138 million. Almost all of this is contained within the housing revenue account, as the remainder of the loan that all councils who wanted to retain their council housing were forced by government themselves to take out. Now, I am proud, frankly, of our own relative stability and relatively favourable position in this increasingly bleak local government picture, and would again take this opportunity to thank our finance team and our portfolio holder, Councillor Merriweather, for their work in this regard. Thirdly, the matter of the Edge, which I know will be raised this evening in the next item as a public petition, and Councillor Mirrlees is going to provide a more formal and more detailed response to that when the petition is presented. And I believe the level of threshold that petition has met will mean it goes to ONS, where it will certainly be discussed further. And I will attend that meeting to speak on that subject when the time comes. I did want to offer, first up, my apologies in the gap in the service, because I know this puts a great many of the community out. It causes a great deal of disappointment, and it's put a lot of people, particularly young people, in a difficult position over the summer. I want to make sure that you have heard me meaningfully apologise to you on that subject, and I do. Now, I know that some people in the audience will have been present for a meeting I had with Sport Hazelmere prior to the elections, where I gave in good faith some assurances as a consequence of meetings that we had with Surrey County Council in the days prior to the election. I'm sure you will all understand that during the election cycle, there is a lot of restriction on what can be said publicly, certainly by local authorities during an election and by me personally. And I was able at that point to forward on to you and give you as much reassurance as I had from the meetings that we had been having with Surrey County Council and also the school that were involved in the process. I do need to, however, express some deep concern that we have got to where we've got to on this matter, because discussions actually started with Surrey County Council back in early 2022 regarding a building that they own, that Waverley have been managing at our cost, public cost in Waverley, since 2003, when Waverley bailed out the charity that was running it. Now, Surrey have made the point that they do not run leisure centres. Well, I think the point I would just need to make here is that leisure centres are a discretionary service for any authority that's running them, whether they be a county, a unitary. It is just usually by custom and practice that borough councils are the authority that runs them. Now, for an authority of our size, we run 5, or at least we run 4 in the major settlements that we have. And honestly, it is quite distressing when we're talking about whole councils running into near bankruptcy territory, or the equivalent of bankruptcy for borough councils, that the idea of anybody here questioning what is discretionary spend is met with such vigour from the county council and also from our MP. I'm afraid our MP continues to ignore almost any intervention that Waverley has tried to make with him over the past nearly 3 years now. I think I've met with him officially perhaps once since the end of the pandemic. And bearing in mind a number of the things that we have asked him about specifically are about local government funding. So I again ask Mr. Hunt, when you send me an email at 5 minutes to 5 this evening, repeating the text of a petition that asks to unilaterally undo a cut without any consideration of the costs. I would ask you, in fact, I would invite you to reply to one of the multiple letters from Waverley Borough Council about local government funding, about business rates retention, about a number of other issues that are material to the survival of local government and the provision of its services. I would invite him to have a conversation with the Chancellor as well, which I imagine will be slightly easier for him than it will be for most other MPs. And I would again renew my invitation that will be again submitted by the Chief Executive of this local authority to him to join me for a meeting to discuss not just the edge, but all of the multiple issues that impact local government and its funding and the consequences to services that that lack of funding brings. Now, very finally, I just want to mention Waverley Lane and the appeal decision which Waverley lost, which was a couple of weeks ago now. Those of us reading that decision, and I'm hoping this is the case for all party members here who were reading that decision, were incredibly disappointed by what that decision said, by the manner and tenor of the inspector's actual ruling on the subject was genuinely quite disturbing in terms of how we all see the local plan process and the role of neighbourhood plans in particular within that process. We have obviously discussed this at length with Farnham Town Council and a few members in this chamber. And I mentioned on the day that we got the decision at executive that we would certainly consider a legal challenge to that decision once we had sought a legal opinion. I'm not going to go into much further detail now, but I can confirm that Waverley will be seeking a legal opinion on that particular judgment. I think it is something that we as a local authority cannot just let go blithely by. Inspectors are, of course, entitled to make a decision in their own right. We are, of course, also entitled to challenge them and to ask them to look at that decision through the mechanisms provided to us by law. Madam Mayor, my apologies for the length of that announcement, but I think considering that the issues that are going on at the moment, it was necessary. So thank you for your indulgence. I will just now go through the executive members who have asked to speak this evening to do so in order, starting with Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, everyone. Part of my portfolio includes the Farnham Infrastructure Programme. So I'll start by giving a 1-minute potted history of the FIP, if that is possible. In the 3 years since the Farnham Infrastructure Programme was launched and the Farnham Board meeting was held to kick this all off, we've seen over this time a few changes. A new FIP project director, a new FIP manager at Surrey, 3 different Farnham Town Council leaders, 3 new members to the Farnham board. So a lot of change. And indeed, a battle royal took place between those who wished to pedestrianise the town centre and those who didn't, culminating in a leadership change at Farnham Town Council. But one thing has remained, excuse me, constant over this period, and that is the support we've had from Tim Oliver, the leader of Surrey County Council, who chairs the Farnham Board and which oversees the project. Now, there are some in this chamber who don't have a lot of time for the leadership of Surrey County Council, but in this respect, Councillor Oliver seems to be a man of his word, and he has stuck with it when others could have walked away. But given the financial and the political uncertainties across the county, in some respects, it has become a race against time to get the funding in place before other events overtook us. So I'm pleased to report this evening that on the 27th of June, the Surrey Cabinet signed off £14 million to support the delivery of this project over the next 2 to 3 years. Once the final designs have been approved, the Surrey FIP team will prepare a business case and final costings to go before their Capital Projects Board. So at last, after 3 to 4 years, work can get started. And the next plan is to look at the mitigation factors that would help alleviate disruption, potential disruption to Farnham's town centre during its implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Other than the edge in a moment, Councillor Mirrlees, did you have anything else you want to add this evening? No, thank you. Councillor Paul Rivers.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for reminding me that Waverley's debt lies somewhat in my portfolio, which I will share.
I'm sure you did
with
really
my
remind me.
colleague here. But it's all to the good, of course. So if I may just give a brief puff on the Landlord Services Advisory Board. We met for the second time in this administration, or we meet for the second time in this administration on Thursday morning. It will be live streamed, and I encourage everyone who can to attend or to view it, of course. We, the Landlord Services Advisory Board, are constituted, thank you, too much debt. So under the Executive Working Group Protocol to promote tenant and leaseholder engagement in decisions relating to the council's housing stock and to provide assurance of our commitment to the Charter for Social Housing Residents. I have the pleasure of chairing the LSAB with 4 Waverley Tenant Panel members and with 4 non-exec elected members. The chair of the Tenants Panel is our vice chair, and he chairs our meetings alternately with me to give us both a rest. We are ably supported by officers, in particular the Service Improvement Manager, Annalisa, and Jeanette, our Tenant Involvement Officer. And as I said, we encourage and get attendance by tenants, leaseholders and members. And I look forward, colleagues, and any member of the public gallery, of course, to join us, see us, and I look forward to your comments. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Rivers. Councillor Liz Townsend.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to add a bit to what the Leader said just earlier about the Waverley Lane appeal. I think that we were all surprised and disappointed at the inspector's decision and the interpretation and the planning weight attributed to the Farnham neighbourhood plan policies, and also the limited weight afforded to the Surrey Hills AONB review candidate areas, which was selected by Natural England as meeting the AONB criteria. And whilst the Leader said, you know, inspectors are quite entitled to come to a different view, I think that we do see some fairly critical inconsistencies between the weight of harm to the countryside afforded in this case and then in the case of the Land at Green Lane Farm appeal and also the Lower Webburn Lane appeal, where the harmful impact on the character and appearance of the countryside was considered to be greater. Whilst I appreciate all sites have individual characteristics, these sites were not in such areas of sensitive landscape, and I think it is, you know, quite right that we do seek a legal opinion to ascertain whether or not we do have, you know, robust grounds to proceed with the challenge. Thank you, Leader.
And last but not least, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader, and apologies to those who may have heard me say this as they avidly listened at 7 o'clock this morning to Radio Surrey. Visitors to Frensham Common are being warned not to enter the water at Frensham Great Pond because of the occurrence of blue-green algae, which was confirmed by the Environment Agency at its regular assessment on the 7th of July. Blue-green algae, as we probably know, is extremely dangerous for anyone, especially to dogs and children, and it can cause dermatitis, eye irritation, rashes, blistering, abdominal pain, diarrhea and nausea, and it's pretty unpleasant. So we have put up warning signs on the site. We have messaging on social media and on the Waverley website, and our rangers are on site providing advice to visitors. This is something which tends to occur every year, and it is a seasonal thing. We await the all clear from the Environment Agency, but on past form, this is not likely to happen until certainly well into the autumn and November, as it was last year. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Williams, and thank you, Madam Mayor. That concludes the updates from the Executive.
Thank you all. So we come to agenda item number 6, which is questions from members of the public. And there are 3 questions tonight as set out in your agendas. The first one is from Mr. Daniel Kutzell, and Councillor Williams, you're going to answer.
Thank you. I won't read the question because members will have it on their papers, and the response is as follows. In general, I believe that the cleaning of our towns, including Godalming, is in general very good, and our contractor applies significant resources to each town centre every day. That said, there will be occasions where something may be overlooked or litter is dropped after we have cleaned, in which case we would encourage the public to report any concerns through our website or customer services. In relation to graffiti, we do aim to clean our own property within a few days of reports, but there can be complications which can lead to delays. For example, council-owned properties referred to in the question does not mean Waverley owned and could be county council or town or parish council owned property. Graffiti is the responsibility of the owner of property to remove, and not Waverley Borough Council by default. And whilst we're happy to receive reports, pass these on to other relevant bodies, we're not in a position unilaterally to remove graffiti from others' property. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. And the second question is from Brian Edmonds, and Councillor Merriweather is going to answer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good evening, everybody. So the question from Councillor Edmonds is as follows. The question is sustained by statutory guidance issued under the Local Government Act 2003 that allows the public to assess a local authority's total risk exposure because of its investment decisions. The losses incurred by Waverley Borough Council leisure centres from 2020 until 2022, advised by Freedom of Information Request A12-4759, were understood to be £3,246,000, with external support of £754,000, reducing the next SIC impact to £2,492,000. Please advise why business interruption insurance did not mitigate these losses and who approved sustaining these losses by considering them an appropriate burden for council taxpayers. The question goes on. The statement of accounts is the principal means by which the council is accountable to its electorate. However, it is understood that, quote, the latest draft statement of accounts for the year ended 31 March 2022 is available on the council's website, subject to conclusion of the audit, close quote. Recognizing this limitation, what management controls are now in place to either prevent or mitigate similar substantial Waverley Borough Council leisure centre losses? And Mr. Evans isn't here. I'm not sure if he's watching. Greetings to him if he is. And the answer is as follows. The losses referred to by Mr. Edmonds were due almost wholly directly to lost revenue from revenue income from the closures caused by the mandatory COVID lockdown, which were not reimbursed from central government. Throughout the period of COVID, there were many decisions that had to be made to maintain and sustain services for residents. The council mitigated lost revenues and controlled costs wherever possible. The whole council approved the budgets and the revised contingency budgets before, during, and now after the COVID lockdowns. Waverley subcontracts the operation of our leisure centres, and for that reason, no business continuity assurance was available on the market to us. We are aware, however, that our operator at the time, Places Ledger, did hold such insurance, and like many of its peers, continues to chase for a payout to mitigate these losses. To date, insurance companies have refused to do so. As a result of the pandemic, Any new contractual arrangements recognise and clearly define the financial responsibilities should such a circumstance arise again. All operating and management controls have been updated to reflect the lessons learned throughout the COVID pandemic. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. And our third question this evening is from Mr. Chris Grimes, and he is here in the public gallery. So may I invite you to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question concerns the Edge Leisure Centre in Hazelmere. This is a facility that was built by public subscription for the benefit of the people of Hazelmere, thanks to the sterling work of the late Nick Chilton and the late Eric Thompson, who have over many years done so much for the development of sport in Hazelmere. Until the 1st of July, the building was used by a large majority of clubs, and for some of these, there are simply no alternative permanent locations for them locally. In addition, Rachel Morris, MBE, a double Olympic gold medal winner in disabled sport, has also had to suspend her activities, which she runs for disadvantaged and disabled children, as she is wholly dependent on the Edge to be able to deliver her programme. We are now told by Surrey County Council that the school and the Waden Multi-Academy Trust to take over the facilities at the Edge will take a minimum of 12 months. We further understand that Surrey County Council are prepared to let Waverley Borough Council reinstate their lease for 2 years. And this, frankly, is the only way that community use of the Edge can continue in the next 12 months. We realise that this would be at a cost, but would save the council in the short term a lot of money in dilapidation costs. A group of users of the facilities has been set up, and those people already have a track record of raising large sums of money for schemes for sport of up to £1 million. And that is now established, and we are confident will raise the necessary funds in the next 2 years to enable continued use of the Edge for community purposes. Health and well-being is an essential part of modern life, and what the clubs need is an assurance that the Edge will reopen. They need certainty to enable them to plan for the future. If the clubs fold due to that lack of that certainty, that will do untold harm to many athletes, some disabled, some with huge potential for the future, and some just denied access to be able to continue with their chosen sport. Hence our petition entitled Protect the Edge, which has huge local support with over 2,700 signatories, which I have formally presented. The only opportunity now to keep the Edge open for community use is for Waverley Borough Council to take back the lease for 2 years whilst funding is sorted out. I was also aware of the letter that Jeremy Hunt had sent to the leader this afternoon, asking the council also to take back the lease. This is an opportunity for the leader of the council to make good on the promises he gave Sport Hazelmere at its meeting on the 17th of April. He told us A, that the Edge would not close for community use, and B, that Waverley Borough Council would be prepared to provide financial assistance for a 2-year transitionary period. So I hope that the council will now agree to take back the lease as offered, providing the categorical assurance that the clubs need for them to be able to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grimes, and Councillor Mary-Louise, you're going to answer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Grimes. The question that I had from you did not encapsulate everything that I have heard just now. All that I had was, can the council give the clubs a categoric assurance that the Edge will reopen for community use by no later than the 1st of October 2023, so that they can plan their future activities? So I will respond to that. We're very sorry that Waverley Borough Council are unable to provide a categoric assurance the Edge will be reopened by October the 1st. So as we are not the owners of the facility, as you know, Surrey County Council are. Where we do have ownership at the site, in the case of ATP2 and the new 3G pitch, we've ensured that these are still open for community use. Without going into the details of all the things that we have encountered during this handing over period, we would assure you that we are very committed to supporting sports activities throughout the borough, and negotiations and discussions with the Multi-Academy Trust will continue and be aimed at reopening the Edge facility as soon as possible. We are very much supportive of this, and I think that whatever we can do, we will bring it to some happy conclusion. But for the rest of the question that, or the response that you have for the rest of what you had to say just now, I was not aware of that. So I'm afraid that will have to come at a later date, unless the leader would like to say something now. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think really the next stages of this, considering your petition obviously meets the procedural rules to be accepted by council and will come to ONS. As Councillor Mirrlees has indicated, that was not part of the original question. And so I'm not able to give those categoric assurances right now, because they have been, as they were when I spoke to Sport Hazelmere previously, subject to discussions with Surrey County Council, the owners of the building. There are some contentious questions regarding the amount of money that will be required in dilapidations. And I know, for example, that those monies are not agreed between Waverley and Surrey in terms of the figure. And the management by Surrey County Council of the building since its handover has also been problematic from our perspective. Now, I'm quite happy to extend an invitation to meet with you, Mr. Grimes, and also with Tim Oliver and Mr. Hunt and our officers to discuss this, and also the local government funding issues that have led us to this particular point, and to continue to support sport and leisure in Hazelmere, which of course we do primarily through the extant Hazelmere Leisure Centre. So whilst I cannot give you a categorical answer to the additional part of your question this evening, I am more than happy to extend an invitation for that meeting to take place. And I will certainly, assuming that the chair of the relevant ONS committee is content for me to speak, and that will be Councillor Carol Coburn, who I believe does not tend to have a particular history of letting me speak at ONS, assuming that she does, I will happily come along and speak to the subject when it comes to ONS. I will, the first thing I will do in the morning is set a meeting invitation out to the people that I have just mentioned, and of course only the people I have just mentioned, where hopefully we can get a little bit further along this path to the mutual benefit of everybody. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for allowing me to come back on the extension to the question.
Thank you, Councillor Follows, and thank you, Mr. Grimes. And I believe you have already presented the petition, which will be referred to the ONS Services Committee in accordance with the petition scheme. So we come now to agenda item number 7, which is questions from members of the council. And I believe there are no questions.
That's correct. There are no questions.
Thank you. Agenda item number 8 is the update of the local plan. Councillor Follows, leader, would you like to move the recommendation?
I don't think any fun council meeting would be complete without a discussion about some aspect of the local plan in one form or another. Madam Mayor, I'm pleased to move the recommendation from the executive, and I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Madam Mayor.
And with your indulgence, Madam Mayor, I'd like to invite Councillor Townsend to introduce the proposals.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, leader. I'll just wait a second whilst the gallery empties. Thank you. As councillors will be aware, local plan part 1 is now over 5 years old, and there was therefore a statutory requirement for this council to review it. This matter came before the council back in March when we agreed that as a result of the review, the plan needed updating, and the officers were to explore all options, including updating the plan immediately to make what was referred to as a broadly compliant plan, as well as a more comprehensive update of local plan part 1 and local plan part 2 together to produce a single local plan. Whilst acknowledging that the existing local plan and neighbourhood plans remain the starting point for all decisions on planning applications while the update is brought forward. This report, the officers brought forward, was considered by the ONS committee on the Services ONS committee on the 21st of June. And their recommendations, which are outlined on page 12 of the report, were broadly agreed by this executive on the 4th of July, along with the recommendation that the council undertakes a comprehensive update of the local plan into a single plan. It is critical that we carry out an update assessment of local housing need and present an appropriate and achievable housing strategy to meet the government's housing target, whilst acknowledging the considerable constraints across the borough, whether that be greenbelt, areas of outstanding natural beauty, or other landscape designations. It is clear from the officer's report that it would be an uphill and no doubt futile battle to convince an inspector that a partial update with an end date of 2032 would meet the requirements in the NPPF, which states that strategic policies should look ahead over a minimum 15-year period. This would be contrary to our officers' advice, the advice of the local government's planning advisory service, and their consultants as well, who go so far as to say that they consider the pitfalls of a partial or broadly compliant update have probably been understated, and a comprehensive update is likely to be the only feasible approach. As pointed out in the report, it would be extremely difficult to limit or justify a partial update, concentrating on housing supply matters only, given the wider implications of the local plan to the critical balance we need to make between development and our environment. We are also only too acutely aware of the limitations of our infrastructure, particularly our water and sewerage infrastructure, which we know has suffered from a lack of investment and oversight. We intend to carry out a full water cycle study to ensure that we understand the environmental and infrastructure capacity needed for our fresh and wastewater. It is clear from my experiences in Cranley that we are already running out of water at peak times, and too much raw sewage is entering our local watercourses. We owe it to our residents and to future generations not to try and put sticking plasters over this plan, but to plan properly and to use all the levers that are available to us to make sure that our borough, its residents and our environment can thrive together. Although we are aware that our timescale for a comprehensive update outlined in option A of the report is ambitious, it is realistic, and it is unlikely that we can achieve this any faster, although we will be open to and will grasp any opportunities that are presented to us to shorten this process. We will also seek to make the most of existing evidence and knowledge in relation to Local Plan Part 1 and Local Plan Part 2, where appropriate, in producing a single plan for the borough. And we will be working closely with our towns and parishes to achieve this. Our aim is to submit the plan for examination in 2026, December 2026, which is much quicker than previous plans. We will, of course, be keeping the ONS committee updated on the progress of the work on the plan, assisted by an executive working group. We are also very aware that there is considerable uncertainty surrounding the adoption or even possible abandonment of the government's planning reforms. We have therefore outlined in the report a twin track approach, working initially within the current legislation, but with the ability to switch to a more streamlined approach for local plans, as has been set out in the government's reforms, should that be announced later next year. To demonstrate that we are making every effort to meet government targets, we will also be updating our housing delivery action plan to identify the reasons for under-delivery of housing within Waverley and explore the ways to reduce the risk of further under-delivery over the forthcoming year, as well as setting out measures for improving the levels of housing delivery across the borough. Whilst I have to stress time and time again, the ultimate responsibility for delivering housing lies with developers. We can grant planning permissions, but we have no carrot or stick to force developers to build within a timescale that meets with government targets. And the current economic climate and the weakening position for house building adds even more pressure on this council. For the avoidance of doubt, the existing local plan, as I said, continues to provide an up-to-date statutory development plan for Waverley, along with our neighbourhood plans, which must remain the starting point for decisions on planning applications while an update is brought forward. Even though we are doing all we can to comply with government policy, we remain subject to the inflexibility of the government's top-down housing targets, which, as I said, when developers don't deliver, tilts the balance away from local decision-making, often overturning those decisions. The balance, as I said, is threatened to tilt even further from our grasp as activity in the housing market weakens, driven by the cost of living crisis, inflation, and spiralling mortgage interest rates. As an executive, we recognise that within the confines of the current national policy, we may face extremely difficult times ahead should the housing market weaken even further. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. So, members, are there any speakers? Councillor Martin.
Madam Mayor, thank you very much. I and members of the Conservative opposition take a rather different view to that expressed by the portfolio holder for the administration. In our last debate on this matter at full council in February, Councillor Carol Coburn, who is not able to be with us tonight, expressed very strongly the view that the council should undertake a swift update of the existing LPP1, holding to the 15-year period ending in 2032. We were advised at that council that this was not possible, yet it has been done by other councils, notably Northamptonshire and I believe Woking and Reigate and Banstead, for instance. If, Madam Chairman, that swift review is not possible, then I believe that option B is a better proposition than option A. Option B would opt for a partial alteration to the adopted LPP1 to address housing supply and related matters. The proposition to go with option A will take longer and is more complex. It takes the proposed period under consideration out to 2043, some 20 years away, and I believe that's too far out. The longer the time period, the more sites that will need to be identified. And as we all know, the selection of more sites for building comes with considerable angst and difficulty, and I think we could avoid some of that. And in addition, if we go for option A, then we will at a stroke necessitate the comprehensive updating of all of the neighbourhood plans. Every single one of those plans will need to be rewritten to accommodate housing for an extra 10 years or so. Goodness knows then the cost to the towns and parishes of doing that. A comprehensive review takes a long time. Now, the administration says that it might take 4 years with adoption in 2027. It's likely, in my view, to take longer. The existing LPP1, as has been mentioned several times, took some 9 years to do. So at a time of government uncertainty over planning systems, the administration proposes to embark on a lengthy, comprehensive review with all of the uncertainty that goes with it. Of course, we need to get the 5-year housing supply fixed as a priority. We need also to consider the habitat regulations constraints. And this is, of course, of great significance to Farnham. More SANG land is needed and must be purchased. And without further SANG, soon there'll be no brownfield sites in Farnham that can receive planning permission. And we will have empty buildings in the town centre and development in green fields around the town, which can provide their own SANGs will take place. So we need to develop a local approach to housing need based as a starting point with the 2021 census and argue that. So, Madam Mayor, with all of these considerations to the fore, I believe that a more rapid and limited exercise is what is needed. My strong preference is to go for option B. I will be voting against recommendation A and urge other councillors also so to do. And I will also request a recorded vote. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Martin. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll just confirm up front that I was also going to request a recorded vote, so I'm sure we'll have support in the chamber for that. A swift update, a partial update, a short update, an agile update. I'm trying to think of all of the various synonyms that we heard for a version that wasn't really doing the whole job that neither officers, members, the Planning Advisory Service, or indeed the law suggests that we should do. It's notable also that every single time other councils have been mentioned in comparison, they're fundamentally false comparisons. Either the situations are fundamentally different in those councils, they're in different places within the cycle of the local plan, they have different issues with housing demand and supply, or fundamentally different economics exist within those boroughs. In similar vein to the benchmarking discussion that was had at ONS Resources the other night, you cannot sometimes compare one borough for another without looking at the context that goes around it. And when you come to the housing market and local plan, the same thing is fundamentally true. Peter, I actually agree with you with a great deal of what you said, because you fundamentally highlighted the level to which the national planning system is flawed. And the system that we operate in is entirely flawed. And I can think of nobody on this side of the chamber that believes that government policy actually delivers on housing, let alone on affordable housing. The whole system is broken. We're operating in a system that almost none of us here, and I actually think I can say hand on heart that most of the Conservatives here don't support either. We merely have to exist and try and get the optimal position in a system that is bad. And not only is it a system that is bad, it is a system that is changing fundamentally. But of course, maybe it isn't, or maybe it is. We really aren't sure. I mean, I think actually I would say, Peter, right now, I'll happily agree with you and vote alongside you in recommendation B. If you can tell me right now when any of the government are going to pass, your government are going to pass their planning reforms or not. If you can tell me that categorically, I will sit back and I will agree that keeping an agile position is not something that is necessary, because of course we'll have the plan, we'll have the certainty, we'll know what's coming, we'll absolutely be sure. And in that certainty, this council and this administration can act appropriately. So
I think, Madam Mayor, Councillor Follows knows that I can't give such an undertaking.
Of course. And as such, Madam Mayor and members, I think taking an approach that at best shows naivety of the situation we're in, and at worst shows hubris of which was punished severely when this council, several administrations back, tried to pass a local plan that it wanted to pass that was not compliant with its own government's policy. A council that was absolutely slapped back and its local plan negated and removed and put us in much of the situation that we're in now. I can only suggest to members that, considering the lack of assurances from Councillor Martin, the leader of the opposition, that his government intend to pass any of the planning reforms that they've spoken of, that option A is the only sensible and reasonable approach that this council can take. So I again commend option A to council.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Clark, and then Councillor Merriweather. Councillor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Paragraph 15 of the National Planning Policy Framework states, the planning system should be genuinely plan-led. Succinct and up-to-date plans should provide a positive vision for the future of each area. A framework for addressing housing needs and other economic, social and environmental priorities. And a platform for local people to shape their surroundings. Now, the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan is certainly succinct, and in fact is held up as one of the best in the country. So we were pleased recently when two government inspectors made multiple references to it when dismissing two appeals for large developments not within the plan's housing sites. But then we were brought back down to earth with a bump when another government planning inspector comes along and completely disregards paragraph 15 of the NPPF and even contradicts his own colleagues on the meaning of the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. To say that the residents of Farnham were incandescent with rage is an understatement. However, all of this does not undermine my faith in the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan or indeed our local Waverley Plan. But what it does demonstrate is that our local plan must be fully updated in order that is made completely robust, so that hopefully rogue planning inspectors will become a thing of the past. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Clark. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I echo everything for Councillor Townsend, Councillor Follows and Councillor Clark have said, and insofar as he criticised the mess that is our government's planning system and planning policy, I'd like to align myself with everything that Councillor Martin said. I agree with them wholeheartedly. It would be easy, wouldn't it, to believe that the government will actually deliver meaningful reforms to the system. It would be so nice to believe that we could act in haste and get away with taking shortcuts and delivering a light touch update or something like that. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to believe that in the face of the advice and the evidence that's written down in black and white in front of us? Unfortunately, I have to go with that advice and with that evidence, much as I'd like to believe otherwise. So I will be voting for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Merriweather. Councillor Denis.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Can I just start off thanking Councillor Clark on behalf of Tim Oliver. I don't think I've ever heard a compliment paid for someone who's worked so hard. I am sure he'll be deeply touched. So on his behalf, thank you for recognising the work he has done. So I couldn't let that one go. I thought I'd just put a little bit of local context into this. For the newer members, I cover Alfold as one of my wards. And under local plan part 1, our allocation was 125 homes, in addition to 1,800 at Dunsfold Park. So far, we've had about 450 approvals. 450 approvals. Many of these through appeals, and unfortunately where we have poorly defended. The area has very, very limited bus service. You're lucky if it turns up and if it stops. We're 10 miles from a train station with no doctors, no shops, no pharmacists. And the only infrastructure actually implemented for these houses so far, a dropped curb. Now, we're very, very proud of the dropped curb. So when it rains, residents can't flush their toilets because all the water goes through to the sewage because the pipes are so old. And if you flush your toilets, all the sewage goes back into the houses. So am I concerned? Absolutely. So the proposals, you know, to do a comprehensive refresh, and we're looking at 2023 to 2043. My question is, how many more homes do you expect a place like Alfold to take? The village can't cope now, and with a plan of 20 additional years, how many do you think are going to be allocated to a place like Alfold? I think I agree with everybody, or especially Councillor Martin. I think 4 years, good luck if you think you can deliver that in 4 years. I hope you do for our residents. I have my doubts because, as you know, these plans always get very complicated and there are always issues. But what concerns me is during this extended time, how many times during appeals do you think the barristers are going to throw that back at us about doing a comprehensive review, and therefore our plan is out of date? I hear the comments are being made, but you've all sat on planning appeals and know how it's turned by the barristers for the applicants. So I think we've got a real concern for our residents. How much weight will our local plan part 2 hold? What about the towns and parishes? I know it's been said there's no problem. There will be, I am sure. I think this is a developer's charter to build, in my view. Now, I've been a borough councillor now for 9 years, and I'm really, really disappointed. We're still under the threat of being placed into special measures. This is just compounds the misery for our residents. There is a saying, be careful what you wish for. And I think it's never truer than now. I think Councillor Martin's already said he wanted a recorded vote, and I think Councillor Follows said he would agree with that, absolutely. And I think that's really important. I want our residents to know who has voted for this, because we are accountable to our residents. I will leave it there because I'm sure there are other speakers. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you indeed, Councillor Dinas. There are, one moment, there's Councillor Hyman and then Councillor Goodridge, and then I'll take the next two, okay?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I do agree with quite a lot of what's been said by both the leader and certainly by Councillor Martin, but with some differences. It is irrelevant as to when the government reforms will happen, because we already have in place the mechanisms in the law that requires that we place a limitation on development through habitats. And this is the big elephant in the room remains the Habitats Directive. And most members, or some members who have been around a long time, will remember that in 2018, following the People Over Wind ruling, there was a ruling that said that you are not allowed, councils and decision makers, competent authorities are not allowed to pretend that they've got effective mitigation in place. They can't make up imaginary mitigation. You actually have to conduct an honest and complete assessment of the effectiveness of the mitigation. And of course, we've never been able to do that. And unfortunately, at paragraph 1.4 on page 10 of our document here, it shows us, which I did submit a members' question to a week ago, but has been rejected. I've asked for it to be answered, but I know I'm not going to get an answer to that question because the council is incapable of answering it honestly. It seems, because it doesn't want to change its position to a lawful position. That People Over Wind ruling confirmed that the advice of officers, Natural England, the government, lawyers, was all incorrect, and that the LPAs who are affected by the SPAs and habitats constraints have been breaking the law since 2007, 2008. Based on a false judgment that was made back then. So it's confirmed that it's unlawful, but no one can admit it, and it's not admitted in here, despite the fact that the law, Habitats Regulations at Regulation 9.3 tells us that we must consider the implications for endangered species and the chances of wiping out endangered species in the conduct of all our functions. That includes tonight, and it's not done. 1.4 makes it absolutely clear that actually by excluding the habitats constraints and pretending that they don't exist, we're going to carry on regardless and waste everybody's time. This is, I mean, if you look at the recommendation, which is easy to support, it looks completely innocuous. Unfortunately, the recommendation to start work, it hides a lot of other things. It hides the fact that we would be agreeing to not address the constraints and People Over Wind compliance, to not adopt a revised LPP1, because we're going to leave it until the next administration. It won't be until after the next elections in 2027. So we would be agreeing to not to do a lot of hard work. We have to change CIL, design codes, neighbourhood plans, SPDs over the next 4 years, a whole lot of work, which could be a complete waste of time because the next administration can throw it out the minute it comes in, because we're not going to actually adopt it ourselves. We have no ambition to do so, according to the documents we have in front of us. We're also agreeing, if we agree to this, to only revise LPP1, not LPP2, which will then run out at that time, because that'll be 5 years old, and then we'll have to do that. So I think we really should be properly considering doing the two together. Running them alongside each other. Otherwise, we're going to be in a difficult position again. We're also agreeing that we are going to get evidence which is needed right now to comply with the law, which Natural England have told us they can't provide. And we all know they can't provide. So, you know, we have to conduct an honest assessment of the potential consequences of our decision, and we can't do so So we're wasting everybody's time. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to vote for this because it is contrary to Regulation 9.3, and I urge other members to respect the law too.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. We have Councillor Goodridge, Councillor Williams and Councillor Austin. So Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Martin says, but I'm too very unhappy with following option A. Presumably, there's going to be far more work to be done under following option A, and which then begs the question, do we have the officer capacity to do this extra work that we're going to have to do? Because without the officer capacity, then the 4 years is going to become 5 or 6 or beyond. And also, I don't understand why we haven't started this process earlier. We all knew LPP1 would be coming to its end of its shelf life. And we seem to be dealing with this somewhat late in the day. We should have been doing it earlier this year rather than leaving it till after the election. And then we would have at least been further down the road than starting now. But bearing in mind we are starting now, and with the extra work we're going to have to do, I'd like to be reassured that we have the officer capacity to deal with option A and all the ramifications that that has. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Martin and Councillor Goodridge particularly have just outlined some of the undoubted challenges that face us in undertaking a comprehensive review. However, notwithstanding these challenges and notwithstanding the limitations of a local plan in terms of what the leader, I think, correctly described as a broken planning system, this is, in my view, something that we must do. And I'm speaking here, I guess, as the portfolio holder for environment and sustainability. What is happening as we speak in Southern Europe is a stark reminder to us that we are going through a climate and ecological emergency. And as we developed and put together LPP2, and as we developed and put together our sustainability supplementary planning document, which are good documents, we were reminded constantly that we were constrained. We pushed the frontiers as far as we could go, but time after time, we were faced with the constraint that we could not go as far as we would wish, consistent with our declaration of climate and ecological emergency because of LPP1. And therefore, I would like to draw attention to the particular paragraph 13 of the officer's report, where it states very clearly that an update of the local plan will allow the council to strengthen policies in relation to climate change mitigation and adaptation to contribute to meeting the council's environmental and sustainability objectives. That is a key element of what this council is about. And therefore, for that reason alone, I would suggest that we do need comprehensively to review LPP, our local plan, and in the manner that's described in the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will be voting against the recommendation for commence work on a new local plan for the following reasons. Waverley has 9 years left to run on its existing plan. A new plan to 2043 will create more years of planning uncertainty and will require us to find and select many more development sites. While we are awaiting the implementation of reforms to the NPPF, we should not be creating more uncertainty. Without an up-to-date plan, our borough's planning defensibility continues to be weak. In focusing on a new plan to 2043, we are setting Waverley up to not be able to meet its 5-year housing targets for many years. The tilted balance will remain in place for many years, and decisions which should be determined by local people via their adopted local and neighbourhood plans and their elected councillors will be pushed through by developers straight to appeal, beyond our control. I am concerned about areas beyond the Greenbelt, like Cranley and Alfold, as they will continue to be most at risk of unfettered development. Development in Farnham will also be greatly impacted if we cannot acquire more SANG. The recommendation report itself states that the timelines proposed are ambitious. Given that the average local plan takes 7 years and the last Waverley one took 9, I believe we need to be pragmatic. I think that is unrealistic. Finally, a new local plan will also mean our adopted neighbourhood plans, which are all coterminous with the existing local plan in 2032, and the result of many years of hard work from many local people, will all need to be rewritten. I think it's wrong of us to ask this of our parish councils. Instead, we should be taking action to ensure neighbourhood plans retain their strength and their defensibility. Therefore, I believe that the correct course of action remains a quick update of the local plan, and our priority should be agreeing a realistic 5-year housing need supply so we can regain control of our planning process. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. We now have Councillor Davidson and Councillor Beaman. So Councillor Davidson, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I recognise that we are in a rather uncomfortable position with regard to our local plans, and I fully support the strategy which takes us down a route which allows us to opt out. But I am concerned that we are starting on quite a complex, long project and I think we're agreeing to, is it £450,000 worth of cost potentially, and I am concerned that project management on a long project such as this is going to be very difficult. And I'd like to see some kind of process put in place to ensure we're on track and the costs are being adequately contained. I have a request as well of those tackling this planning exercise by looking at non-NPPF issues, which I think we need to address for our community. I'm thinking in particular of the medical services provided in our communities, which are overstretched at present. We have in my own town, a shortage of GPs in our 2 surgeries. And I'm sure that's probably the case in the other parts of our borough. So that has to be addressed. And I would urge during this period that we as a borough pick this up with the NHS. And the other local issue, and I think it's part of at the mind of our executive, is that we must pursue the lack of transportation. We're building these huge, great big estates on the edges of our towns with no transport at all. So what are we doing? We're just adding to the environmental damage by everybody running around in cars. So I think that's something else which needs to be tackled during this process.
and I would urge that the council do just that. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, councillor Davidson. Councillor Beeman.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Well, what a mess we're in. The MPPF was supposed to simplify the planning guide procedure. It strikes me the only winners out of it are not people in houses. It seems to be lawyers, barristers and legal firms. But nevertheless, that's a part. I have to say that in the beginning, I was very supportive of to get this plan updated as quickly as possible, obviously. But I have to say that I've been reassured that still our local plan and our neighbourhood plans still have credence in the fact that apart from Waverley Lane, they've been paid great attention in recent appeals. So I think in that regard, I have changed my support and I will be supporting this motion. But I would ask one question. If we can't find enough places for our own housing need, are we now going to approach other local authorities for them to provide our own housing need?
Thank you. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In this discussion, we frequently hear about defensibility and other issues, which somewhat suggests that one of the functions of the council is to prevent additional housing. And I think Councillor Davidson's contribution is much more balanced here, that what the council should be seeking to do is to provide additional housing that ordinary people can afford and make sure that that's balanced with the infrastructure that housing needs. And we're talking, as Councillor Davidson said, about health, about roads, about public transport. It is possible, without being too political, that a year from now, or 18 months from now, that we will have a different government with different priorities. And I hope that in the course of the development of local plan, we will have the opportunity to benefit from national policies focused more on affordable housing, genuinely affordable housing, and the infrastructure to support it. Many of us were elected back in 2019, partly on a commitment to revise the LPPT1 because of its failure to consider all the aspects that I've mentioned. And this is the first opportunity that we've had to do that. And I think we should seize it rather than merely rush a temporary fix on the issue of housing supply. As portfolio holder for housing strategy, I'm very keen that we should see the whole issue of housing supply linked with the other infrastructure in a holistic approach. That's what we need from the local plan, and I hope that that's what we will get.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've sympathise with the concerns raised about timing. I understand that it would be helpful to get this completed reasonably quickly. However, first of all, I don't believe that starting from scratch will take as long as it did the first time. Much of the work has already been done, can be revisited, and it can be incorporated into a new plan. I'm also reassured in terms of timing because this is precisely the recommendation that was made, first of all, by the officers who will understand issues of their capacity, and indeed by the Planning Advisory Service. However, it is exactly the fact that the original local plan took so long that is part of my reason for supporting the proposal to begin from scratch. And that is that circumstances have changed very dramatically over the last few years, as precisely Councillor Williams has already pointed out. The issue of climate and biodiversity is much more important and was not adequately covered in the initial plan. And there are other weaknesses, I think, in the original plan which need to be addressed fundamentally. That's it. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other speakers, so I'm going to Councillor Townsend.
I was just wondering, Madam Mayor, if I might respond to some of the queries that have been raised so far, perhaps, to be helpful.
Yes, I'm sure that the leader would be glad of help because I was going to turn to him next.
Madam Mayor, may I suggest actually that Councillor Townsend sum up the item if that's acceptable to you at this point?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I am very aware of everybody's concerns, and obviously anything to do with the local plan, they're very, very valid concerns. I would just point out that, again, that we have sought not only our own officers' advice, but advice from the local government's planning advisory service and their consultants as well. And all of them think that the actual going for a swift update would be the wrong thing to do. And don't forget that we would be challenged on that by developers. It's all very well saying we can be challenged by developers, but they would definitely challenge us on that point if we just went for a swift update. And also the NPPF requires us to have 15 years minimum for our policies. So it also wouldn't meet that. So, you know, we have looked at this in depth. The government's planning reforms, it would be great if they were introduced. You know, it does introduce a bit more streamline, it gives more protection to neighbourhoods plans, increasing it from 2 years to 5 years. And that's why we've gone for this twin track approach, so that the data gathering, the evidence that we will gather in the beginning when we move forward will be evidence that we needed to gather anyway, like objectively assessed housing need. So we are making sure that we're agile enough to move should the government planning reforms come into play. I think that that Councillor Deaner's talking about Orfold and saying about the number of homes there and the approvals. Most of it went on appeal. This council has never said that Orfold is a sustainable location for that amount of housing. It goes against our spatial strategy. It is not something that we wanted to place that much housing in Orfold. You know, the plan isn't out of date. Our local plan, as has been said over there by Councillor Beeman, the local plan and also Farnham's neighbourhood plan has been successfully defended appeals in Farnham. It's not a developer's charter to build. The NPPF is a developer's charter to build, not our local plan. Councillor Hyman, I totally appreciate his concerns about habitats. It is a statutory requirement of any update of the local plan for us to adhere really rigidly to the habitats legislation, and we will be doing that. I'm happy he said his question was rejected. It didn't come in time, Madam Mayor. So, but equally, if he's got a question that he submitted, I'm happy to provide him with a written response on that. Councillor Goodridge about the resources. Yes, of course, that's a concern. However, we have budgeted for the resources. I have spoken to my officers at length about the resources required, and it is in a long conversation with them and discussions that they really feel that they can meet these targets. So we very much hope, we know it's quick. There were problems obviously before, but we are really, really hoping that we can meet the target and have a fully adopted single local plan for residents to give them that security, and also so that we can meet the government targets. You know, whether there's a change of government, there does not appear to be any change in those targets overall. So we will still be looking at those targets. Hopefully the way they're measured and the flexibility in that measurement will be changed. Councillor Austin, I'm not sure how you think we're going to meet the government target without having a change in the local plan. The 5-year housing land supply has to be looked at every year. It's nothing to do with the local plan. We have to deliver housing to our target. So we would have to look at that every year at this moment in time. Whether that 5-year housing land supply policy changes with the change in government, that's neither here nor there. We have to follow as we are. And Orfold and Cranley are at risk because of government policy, how they view countryside beyond the green belt. That is not us. The weight given to green belt is much higher than countryside beyond the green belt. It is not a landscape designation, it is a policy designation. So that is a government choice. The neighbourhood plans would not need all rewriting. Obviously, there may be a need to allocate other sites, but all the policies contained within neighbourhood plans would be taken forward. There may be bits that neighbourhood plans would welcome an update, and neighbourhood plans have to be updated as well. So there is, not a statutory update, but should be updated to meet the requirements of the housing allocation within the local plan. The project, Councillor Davidson mentioned about the project management, and we are setting out, I'm going to be assisted with an executive working group. We will be obviously going back to ONS and checking the process as we go. If you look at the report on under point 7.229, there are a list of different reports that we will be needing to gather, including a transport assessment. I hear his plea about the medical. As a mother of a doctor, as an NHS doctor, I'm very, very, very aware of the shortcomings of the NHS, of the terrible working conditions that doctors find themselves working within, and the shortage of GPs, and the drain to other parts of the world of our qualified medical staff. And that is something that I am very, very concerned about, separately to any update of local plan. David Beeman, Councillor Beeman spoke about the duty to cooperate. Well, if the reforms go through, that will be actually abolished, and it has had limited effect at delivering housing, very limited effect, and it will be replaced with something called an alignment policy, and there's something about appropriate engagement between authorities. But yes, if we can take advantage of any of those, we will do. So, it isn't easy. It isn't something that we want to do. It isn't something we've taken lightly, but we really feel that this is the best option for our residents. So I think I would, if you're on the edge and thinking about supporting or not supporting, do think about that, this is a really heartfelt plea to think about our residents and think about what is best for them, and to think about having that plan in place and regaining some control of our housing delivery within the limitations of the levers that we can pull. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for letting me speak so long.
Well, I think you were responding to all the concerns, so thank you, Councillor Townsend. Is there anything, Leader, you want to add?
Only to document that wonderful soundbite. The local plan isn't the developer's charter, the NPPF is. I think that's probably the most clear and succinct way that any of these issues could have been put. And I will just ask for a recorded vote. I think there's support in the chamber for such a thing.
Yes, so indeed we have a recommendation in front of us, but before that there have been requests for a roll call vote. So those in favour of a recorded vote, please show. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Members, usual drill, when I call your name, if you could say for, against or abstain, please. So Councillor Atkins. Councillor Austin. Councillor Barker. Oh, right. Councillor Beeman. Thank you. Councillor Busby. Councillor Clark.
A big four.
Thank you. Councillor Coburn is away. Councillor Crowe.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson.
4.
Councillor Denis. Yes. Councillor Deuce.
4.
Councillor Fairclough.
4.
Councillor Follows.
4.
Councillor Gale.
4.
Councillor Goodridge.
Against.
Councillor Hess is away. Councillor Higgins.
4.
Councillor Hyman.
Against.
Councillor Keane.
4.
Councillor Keel.
4.
Councillor Lawton.
4.
Apologies from Councillor Law. Councillor Long.
4.
Councillor MacLeod.
4.
Councillor Martin.
Against.
Councillor McLean. Councillor Merriweather,
For.
Councillor Mirrlees,
For.
Councillor Morrison,
For.
Councillor Munro,
For.
Councillor, Councillor Munro, Councillor Murray,
For.
Councillor Nicholson. It's not here. Councillor Palmer,
For.
Councillor Ken Reid,
For.
Councillor Ruth Reid,
For.
Councillor Raleen,
Against.
Councillor Paul Rivers,
For.
Madam Mayor, Councillor Penny Rivers,
For.
Councillor John Rubini,
For.
Councillor Spence,
For.
Councillor Staunton,
Against.
Councillor Steiger,
For.
Councillor Sullivan,
Against.
Councillor Townsend, Liz Townsend,
For.
Councillor Philip Townsend.
For.
Mr Deputy Mayor, Councillor John Ward,
For.
Councillor Weldon,
For.
Councillor White,
For.
Councillor Wicks, apologies, Councillor Williams.
For.
Thank you. I've got 35 votes in favour and 9 against with no abstentions.
Thank you, Fiona. So that is carried. And we now move on to agenda item number 9, which is the public space protection orders, number 1 and number 2, no pun intended. Leader, I believe you should move the recommendation.
It's interesting. I was about to open with let's see if we can get through this without any further puns, but of course you have the prerogative, Madam Mayor, and I'm sure we will all follow your lead accordingly. I will in a moment just be moving this over to Councillor Fairclough to introduce. I would just say there were in my Hatters Comms portfolio holder, it never ceases to amaze me how often the public spaces protection orders on dogs control and dog fouling top the charts in terms of communications from residents, in terms of engagement from residents. It is by far and away the most responded survey every single time we do this, repeatedly, above even things as substantial as climate change. So I would ask everybody to put an appropriate level of seriousness on this debate when we get to it. The dog owners versus the non-dog owners, I'm sure will have to keep their peace for at least half an hour while we deal with this. But at that note, I will hand over to Tony Fairclough, who will introduce. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Leader. These orders need to be reviewed every 3 years, and we are now at the end of a 3-year cycle. I'd like to remind the Council of the key reason for recommendation, which is specifically to address issues caused by irresponsible dog owners, not the dogs themselves. And it does this by means of controls that also seek to educate these dog owners of their responsibilities, and that is a key thing. As has already been mentioned by Councillor Follows, there has been considerable public consultation, which is available to review on pages 43 to 54. And as Councillor Follows has said, it did generate significant response. The orders have been considered by the executive, and all councillors were offered the opportunity of a full meeting, a full briefing at which questions were taken last week. This evening, I recommend that the council give their approval to make the orders.
Thank you, Councillor Fairclough. Are there any speakers? Councillor Keane.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I'm really pleased to see this come before us, because we all know that the irresponsible dog owners really don't care. Even if they put their dog's rubbish in a bag, it gets thrown on the ground, hung on a tree, left on somebody's wall, or for children to walk on the pavements. But equally, my concern is where dog owners have taken to taking their dogs off leash in the cemeteries. And I've had reports from Sunvale Cemetery where the dogs are defecating on the graves And it's really sad. So who is going to monitor that? I don't know. I'm hoping that the public will report what they see. But for me, I think it's important that dog owners are responsible for their pets and they don't allow them to do their business on public spaces, in cemeteries or pavements. So I do welcome this report and I'm really pleased to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see, oh, Councillor Weldon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's obvious. English people, and certainly here in Waverley, love their dogs, and we all know that. I take the point, and I agree with the observation earlier. The problem is not with dogs, but with irresponsible dog owners. I note from the research that was done, the overwhelming majority of residents support these measures, and I would absolutely support them. However, I just want to have a slightly related question rather than an observation. Dogs must be kept under control. There can be a nuisance, but there are forms of nuisance which are not covered by these regulations. I have a neighbour, for instance, who is very concerned about persistent nighttime barking from a house behind her, and I wonder whether we have any strategy for dealing with persistent barking. So that's a question slightly off topic, but I hope somebody can answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, well, quickly, I would like to certainly on my behalf and possibly on behalf of the council, apologise to the residents who are disappointed with the effectiveness of the measures. It is very difficult. We are in a position where actually we don't have the tools because we do not have the number of people. We cannot employ the number of people necessary to police all of the dogs that are defecating. You simply can't have people sat around for 2 days watching an area to try and catch a handful of people who are causing the problems. It is extremely difficult. This is obviously, Waverley's best attempt to be able to do something about the problem. It's very disappointing that when you look at what we're doing, you see that the dogs on lead by direction, which you think, oh, that's brilliant. That means everybody's got to keep their dogs on a lead. They'll see, you'll be able to see the person with the dog that stopped in that particular stance, and who don't then bend down and pick it up or whatever. But unfortunately, by direction is only if they are ordered to by one of our enforcement officers. So that isn't you've got to have your dog on a lead in that area. It's simply that if you are caught, then someone can say to you, and if they can catch up with you and work out who you are, something might happen eventually. So it is incredibly difficult. We have got to try and find better solutions to this, because when you have so many people who are still unhappy with it, even though we've got controls in place, then obviously we can do better, and we must. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Beaman.
Just a question. I know the recommendation says that the FPN level is set at £100. I believe that's the maximum that the authority can fine. And I believe the council has approached central government to increase that level. Should that actually be granted? Who knows? Would we have to come back to council to increase that figure? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Follows, and then Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So actually, I did ask this question in response to a number of issues regarding the fines that Waverley are allowed to levy directly. I asked this in particular to the fining of individuals who may have been caught doing something that might have started fires at Frensham Ponds, but actually the whole matter of how much we are able to do as a fixed penalty notice is really the underlying legal principle. We are only allowed to charge a maximum of £100 for those fines. There are a number of antisocial behaviour ordinances being considered by the government that may allow us to charge in the future more than that. in one of my usual sort of fits of morning belligerence, walking in after the fire last at Frensham, I asked if we could immediately slap them up to £1,000 because frankly, anybody who's starting a fire on a heathland like that needs to be taught a lesson that they will actually learn. And equally with some of the dog control measures, since the issues that happened in one of the other Surrey boroughs where an individual was killed by a dog, I would imagine that following the conclusion of the inquest from that particular incident, there will be some requirement for government to do something a little bit faster in regards to the level of controls and the level of fine we are allowed to push. Otherwise, we will be waiting for the government to actually pass their updated and enhanced antisocial behaviour measures. I have asked Richard Homewood, who has done this, to write to the relevant Secretary of State to ask if those measures are likely to be forthcoming within the term of this Parliament. I, as ever, await a response, Councillor Beaman.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Councillor Munro first.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Of course, I support this wholeheartedly. What's not to like? I'd just like to make 2 points, really. Obviously, myself and Councillor Staunton, we represent perhaps the most rural area against stiff competition, perhaps, but we certainly do. And so this is really important to our residents. And I'd like to take this opportunity, actually, for really paying tribute to Waverley Borough Council's rangers and enforcement officers. They have raised their game in controlling undesirable matters at Frensham Ponds and all around there. We haven't got there yet. There are still some very irresponsible people who are not treating the area as they should do, but it's much better than it was. And I think we should put that on record. The limitation of this PSBO, of course, is the P bit, public, but there are vast swathes of our countryside which are not public. The MOD own a lot of Hankley Common, the National Trust, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds and so on, and they are private landlords and we have no powers over those. I know officers have been in touch with all those bodies with varying degrees of success, I have to say, not their fault, but those bodies, to try and get them to fall into line as much as they can with what we are doing. Because after all, the dogs don't know the difference, the nightjars don't know the difference, and the public basically doesn't know who is owning the lands and why it's just confusing to have different regulations in different places. I wish all the other bodies, and I'm not criticising them, at least not publicly, would actually follow Waverley Borough Council's lead in that. And so could I take this opportunity of asking our officers and indeed the executive to keep pressing on, to make quite sure, to try as far as possible to have a uniform system of firstly enforcement, which probably means more of it, and secondly a legal basis to simplify and make consistent the dog control regulations throughout the whole of the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Munro. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My sister's a dog groomer, and I was with her a couple of weeks ago, and I was surprised to hear that there's no licensing or regulation of any professional dog groomers, walkers, unlike hairdressers or any licensees. There's none of that. So is there a proposal at some stage to license professional people who look after dogs in a professional capacity, either in salons, grooming, or, as we've seen, walking dogs? And maybe that license money could well go to enforcement and that kind of thing. So it would help. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Leader, I don't see any other speakers, so would you like to respond and sum up?
I'll just respond very quickly to George before I hand over to Tony to sum up, if you don't mind. We are obviously not allowed to establish new legal and regulatory regimes ourselves as a borough council. That must emanate from Parliament. I would imagine after the incident that I mentioned in another Surrey borough, the incident that somebody lost a life, I would imagine there will be calls on government to put in some form of regulatory framework, particularly for dog walkers, and I would imagine that would limit or seek to limit the number or size of dogs they're allowed to keep on within their individual control for a period of time. I imagine if that sort of regulation is passed, this council will almost certainly take it very seriously and adopt what we need to adopt. And I would hope that it would also imbue us with enough regulatory powers and enforcement powers to do something meaningful about it. Until the government do that, though, we are unable to enforce rules that don't apply in law yet. At that point, if I may hand over to Tony. Thank you, Councillor Feckle.
Thank you, Leader. If I may start by thanking, on behalf of Richard Homewood, thanking Frensham Parish in particular for their input into the creation of these orders. I'd like to finish by referring to Councillor Hyman's statement that we can do better. Of course, we are looking to do better, but we're also, if I may also talk about, refer to Councillor Monroe, we're asking the public to do better. And that's what these orders seek to do. As I said earlier, by educating, informing them of the consequences, and by putting in measures that if they are irresponsible, that we have the means to penalise them for doing so. So once again, I would like to recommend these orders to the council.
Thank you very much. So there are three parts to this recommendation. The first one is on dog fouling, the second is on dog control, and the third is on fines. Is it agreed to take them together? Agreed. And shall we test out our electronic voting? So green is in favour, yellow is abstain, and red is against. All vote now, please. All vote when Fiona says.
See some flashing lights. So green button is for, yellow is abstain, red button is against. And you should be able to see on the right-hand side of the screen, that's 44 votes in favour, none against, and no abstentions.
Thank you very much. That works then. And that is carried. So we come now to agenda item number 10, which is the approval of funding for Farnham Museum Mend project to enable repairs and conservation work to Wilmer House. Leader, to move the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Before I go any further, I'm pleased to introduce this particular motion, and I believe I have a seconder. I am also very pleased to say that this should be one of the last steps to something that I was long told was impossible by a number of people who are no longer here. I'm very pleased to hand it to Councillor Mirrlees, who I'm sure will be equally happy to introduce this.
Thank you, Leader. As you're aware, Waverley has accepted a capital grant of £734,335 from the Arts Council to carry out the essential brickwork repairs and conservation works to Wilmer House, the Museum of Farnham. However, the estimates for the work sit at £1,029,145 with, after currently identified match funding and from Waverley and external funds, leaves a potential budget gap of £275,000, which we fully intend to raise through external funding. We are meeting with the Arts Council in a few weeks' time, and meanwhile we are looking at all the opportunities to seek other funding and to fundraise with local and national parties. However, to accept the full grant, the Council does need to agree to cover this gap in the event this is not achieved. I'm sure we will. I'm very positive about it, but it is essential that we do it. Otherwise, we would lose the MEND grant, and I cannot imagine that we would ever get that money ever again. So, I mean, it was a hugely wonderful thing to achieve. So I would just hope that everybody here understands how important that is. And once we've made this decision, we can move forward with the much needed improvements to Wilmer House and start the journey of setting a new vision for building a museum service. This has gone on for such a long time, and I just hope that we can now move it forward and see a wonderful result, which I think we'll all appreciate. Thank you very much.
Councillor Hyman.
Madam Mayor, so I recall when I was a new councillor some years ago, one of the first thing I really remember was a meeting that we had down at the garden room of Farnham Museum. And it was looked upon as, you know, most of us as something that we simply weren't going to be able to find the funds to do. We were looking, there were all sorts of options for selling the building or moving the museum around, all sorts of things which really were each of them impractical. And I just think that, you know, we have to be, I have to, you know, thank the current administration and past administration for all the work that was done to pursue this. And in particular, Councillor Miralles and Councillor Dixon and a few others who have also refused to let go of this and have been like terriers on it and have made sure that in the end, we got a sensible result, and it looks like we've got that. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I must admit, I had not been to the Museum of Farnham until I went there last week with my son. What I found was a fantastic Grade 1 listed building. You could see the beauty despite the scaffolding outside. As I went in, I was greeted by two volunteers, Angela and Karina, who were fantastic. They're extremely enthusiastic, knowledgeable, and I'd like to place on record my thanks to them for welcoming me and my son. Although it is called the Museum of Farnham, I felt this was very much a museum for Waverley. For example, on display was a Bronze Age gold ring that was found in my neighbouring ward of Cranley. I think it's important to give certainty in respect of funding available for this project. However, as referenced in the agenda, I would like to see much of this budget covered by external funding if possible for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as a council, it's important to be prudent with money. But secondly, in my experience, unexpected issues can crop up in building projects, which can increase costs. Accordingly, further external funding will be important. However, I no doubt that this council will work hard to secure that, having already shown great tenacity in securing almost £750,000 from the Arts Council. As a result, I fully support this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Beeman.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam. I'd like to put on record that in fact, one of the external funders is in fact Farnham Town Council, who have already pledged £10,000. And in fact, I prepared to pledge another £10,000 for the internal changes that were necessary after the changes. I too would like to see more external funding, and well, I don't know, but I believe there's a certain picture which might be sold. I don't know if that's possible or not.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers, so would you like to sum up and respond?
Thank you. I imagine that has now started a great debate for the extraction of Cranley artefacts from the territory, and I shall now be inundated by ward members from Cranley and residents of the East demanding their artefacts are returned. So thank you very much, Michael. On a serious note, thank you for highlighting that, and I'm sure they'll very much welcome the very positive comments. And you're quite right. The executive intends to ensure that as much of this money is sourced from other places as possible. And I again, thank Councillor Beeman for going on record in public and pledging, I think I heard 20,000 there, just to be sure of that, David, yeah, 20,000? Yeah. That's right. It's on the webcast now, so it's fine. It's binding as far as I'm concerned. But in terms of the next steps, the intention is to raise as much money as possible in terms of meeting that gap. But as I think you've quite clearly stated, officers such as Charlotte and obviously with Kika's support and Mark's support and a number of other people past and present to make sure that we've got this massive grant to deal with the vast majority of it is such a huge step. We would be absolutely silly to throw away this one opportunity. It is an opportunity also for Annie Wrighton not to bring any subject to do with the museum to us ever again, I think, as a collective group over here. And honestly, I really just hope members seize this opportunity to actually redress what is a fantastic building and allow the museum service to move on to its very excellent modern new phase. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, Leader. So now, Fiona, we come to a chance for another electronic vote on this recommendation, which is that a budget of up to £275,000 be approved from capital receipts or the property investment reserve to fund a potential budget gap in the MEND project if efforts to obtain external funding are unsuccessful or overall project costs increase following the tender for the main build contractor. Hopefully that's given time for the electronic voting system to be ready. Yes, so all those in favour, please vote.
It's the green. So we have 44 in favour, no abstentions and none against.
So that too is carried. Well done, everyone. Aren't we moving with the times? Agenda item number 11, the proposed revisions to the scheme of delegation to officers, planning committee procedure rules and councillors planning code of good practice. Councillor MacLeod, to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Page 4 of your agenda sets out 4 recommendations from the Standard and General Purpose Committee to the Council, which in the view of the committee, if the Council approves, will result in improvements in how planning works in the Council, both for members and for officers, and how the Planning Committee works. These recommendations are fully explained in pages 86 to 142 of your papers. So I obviously don't have time to explain them in thorough detail, but I would like to say they were very thoroughly discussed by the Standards Committee. And the Standards Committee did make some relatively straightforward, simple amendments to them, but they were based on recommendations from Claire Upton Down, our Executive Head of Planning, and supported by Fiona Cameron, our Interim Head of Democratic Services. And I have to say, the officers put a tremendous amount of work into this. There was a very short period between the council meeting on the 7th of June, the extraordinary council meeting, which agreed changes to the planning arrangements of setting up one planning committee of 15 members. And the subsequent meeting of the Standards Committee on 7th of July, which is only about 4 weeks after, and a week of that is taken up by distributing and publishing papers. So a tremendous amount of work was done by Claire and by Fiona in that period, and they've come up with some very important documents to improve the way planning works. I don't propose to say very much about each of them, but I'll briefly comment on each of them. The first proposal, the first recommendation relates to the revised scheme of delegation. And Claire, in fact, explained to members in a members' briefing about a week ago, the 4 key points as far as she was concerned was that, first of all, the requirement to put all planning applications above 25 units to the planning committee is now gone. That's really a bit of a hangover from what was previously the joint planning committee, where all applications of that size automatically went to the joint planning committee. That is no longer seen to be necessary. Secondly, the 21 days cut off for members to be able to call in items to the committee if they wish to do that is now gone as well. It was felt that this is putting too much pressure on councillors to not giving them enough time to properly consider applications and discuss it with their residents, etc. So that is gone as well. Thirdly, the objections required by householders has actually been increased to 10, and in terms of non-householder applications to 20. Now, the reason behind this is actually to try and ensure that we don't have a whole load of unnecessary applications coming to the committee. What we're trying to achieve in all of this is that the officers spend less time having to work on unnecessary applications coming to planning committees and more time working with councillors to properly review and work on how planning applications should be dealt with. So that's really the key points of recommendation 1. Recommendation 2 relates to revised planning committee procedures. And this includes actually the recommendation that was previously made that ward councillors should actually only speak on their own, not speak on their own ward, but as part of the committee, but stand back and speak as local members. And that was previously agreed, and that is now incorporated into the planning procedures. The other thing that was discussed really as a result of comments and very important comments from Councillor Goodrich was to ensure that the planning committee now actually comes up with really valid planning reasons for rejecting applications if they wish to do so, so that when we go to appeal, we're in a much better position. And I would encourage Councillor Goodrich to explain, he can explain this a little bit better than I can do, as it's his idea. If he would like to, in the debate, explain a little bit more the reasoning behind that idea. The third recommendation relates to the planning code of good practice. This has been completely revised and a great deal of work has gone into this, and it covers a whole series of items from training of councillors, from pre-application discussions, site visits and planning committee protocol. It's a very, very comprehensive document, and everybody involved in planning should spend time reading and understanding. It's a very useful document, in fact, and it's a big step forward from the previous document. The final item is actually something that Claire is very keen to do. She intends to produce a memorandum of understanding in terms of how officers and councillors should work together. She's already started work on this actually, and she's just, I understand she sent some initial ideas to all councillors and she's looking for responses from them. So that's really all I want to say, Madam Mayor, other than to formally propose these recommendations to the council. And I think I have a seconder in Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Please to second.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Could I just address 3 small things? Firstly, thank you to the Standards Committee for all of their hard work, as well as our monitoring officer and head of democratic services. They put a lot of energy and time into this to get us to the place that we are now. I would also like to just comment on 2 matters that have been raised to me either by other councillors or by members of the public in the interim. The first is there was some discussion, certainly with the Liberal Democrat group and also from a number of other councillors, I think including yourself, Councillor Gale, in regards to whether the outcomes of the committee had fully codified the right of ward members to speak at the beginning and the end. And I just wanted to clarify that sections 2.12 and 2.13 combined together establish that right for both for councillors who are ward members and a member of the committee and those who are not. And furthermore, in sections 23.1 and 23.2 taken together in the general procedural rules, those rights are established. And I've again confirmed that with officers today to ensure that right is properly there. And just to address some comments regarding the changes to the number of letters and being required to come into a planning committee. In a lot of these have been questions from members of the public, but in broad brush, the number of objections required in an urban ward, such as my own and Councillor Keel's ward, is very straightforward often to get, 5, 10, 15 objections. It's a road with 100 houses and perhaps it's very straightforward. There may be areas in Waverley where there aren't 5 houses at all. There might not even be 2 in a particular area. So it is always required, I think, for the ward members themselves to be able to have the right to call in. So the combination of the removal of the 21-day rule and the reinforcement of the right for councillors to call in an application as long as they have valid planning reasons, actually I think strengthens ward members' ability to properly do their job in terms of representing their residents and their ward on matters of planning. I've been through many of these other issues at the Standards Committee and at Executive and various other places where we've discussed, and I think it reflects the debate that was had, and I think very much meets the objectives of both the Executive and the Standards Committee to empower ward members to really serve their constituents better in matters of planning, or at least so far as planning policy allows. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I firstly say that I'm against in principle to reducing the powers of councillors in planning. But having said that, one has to then ensure that the rules are as strong as they can be. I certainly don't agree in increasing the numbers to 10 and 20 under the scheme of delegation 3 and 4 on pages 103 and 104. When I raised it at standards, I was told, as Councillor Follows has said, that we should be reassured, we can always call it in, but this dilutes, in my view, the member situation, particularly in rural wards such as mine, where, as has been mentioned, there are fewer neighbours around. And of course, when we have a public speaking on something, the threshold there is 5, not 10. The good news was the cutting out of the 21-day cutoff, which is good news. However, there's some drafting that I'm not happy with. On the scheme of delegation, page 103, no mention is made there of consultation with the chairman of planning. It is mentioned in the procedure rules in paragraph 19.5 on page 121, but it's not on the scheme of delegation. And I think it should be, because that is the prime document. And in other parts of those rules, on page 101, for example, where there are some new items, it does say in consultation with the chairman of planning. Why is that not in the scheme of delegation on page 103? So far as the procedure rules are concerned, Councillor MacLeod asked me to explain what I was worried about, and that was that we had the procedure rules previously that the chairman had to take the officer's recommendation first, however the debate was going. And if it was clear that the debate was going the wrong way, there was no power to take that first. That has changed. But there are other things, which is good, but there are other things that aren't as good. If you look on page 105, paragraph 2.3, this was something that I raised to put in, namely that if you're not there for the whole of the debate on an item, you should not vote. I don't think we've ever had a situation whereby you're not allowed to take part in the discussion or the debate. I think we have been allowed to do that, but then not vote at the end. And it seems that if you arrive a few minutes late, you can't even speak on the matter. And I think that is wrong in principle. And therefore, I think that should be amended to take out the words "take part in the debate" and of course, this also appears in the planning code at page 224. The final bit, I made it clear at committee that for a chairman to divide the discussion between questions and debate was an impossibility, because people spoke about what they felt and then asked a question at the end. The rules still provide that you have to debate, you have to ask your questions first, and only when that's all over, you then start the debate. To be honest, I think that's wrong, and that on a practical basis, you should be allowed to ask your questions and debate at the same time. It'll be much quicker and far more effective. And therefore, I think the rules should be changed to cover that. So I don't think that was intended, that they should be separate. Previous rules certainly didn't have that in them. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's always seemed to me to be a certain mystique about planning, but I think it's not mystique, it's lack of knowledge and misunderstanding. So I'm pleased to see in the memorandum of understanding that there will be an ongoing programme of planning training. This is to be welcomed, as attending training before you're exposed to the first planning committee is one thing, indeed necessary, but subsequent training thereafter, in my view, will prove even more beneficial, having then been exposed to real planning applications and subjected to the planning officer's presentations at the committee. Interestingly, Claire is suggesting that planning officers will also be invited to attend some of these planning sessions along with councillors. Queensberry rules come to my mind. But this is indeed for Waverley revolutionary and will help break down any artificial barriers between these two groups, who should be working together rather than being adversaries. This forum will also provide the opportunity for members and officers to be kept up to date with central government planning reforms, if and when they ever see the light of day. It's important, though, that all councillors attend planning training, not just members of the planning committee, as it will give you the necessary knowledge when dealing with applications within your own ward, which you may decide to bring to the committee, if, of course, there are good planning reasons to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. We have Councillor Gale, Councillor Rubini, Councillor Hyman and Councillor Ward. So Councillor Gale first and then.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly. Councillor Follows, the non-committee members who are ward councillors can speak for 4 minutes after the debate and or before and after, because that is very important to us to be able to come back. I just really wanted to say on record, I think 10 objections coming in is way too many for us people out in the outsticks out there, because you don't have 10 houses around you if somebody's trying to build something that's inappropriate. I'm very sad that that's there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rubini.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to say that we've had a couple of meetings now under the one planning committee, and they've run very smoothly in efficiency. So obviously I was there being on the committee. They weren't that long. They did indeed finish 8 o'clock, 8:30. It's a dread of some of the councillors that they would go on forever, but they don't appear to. I would also support this because of the ward councillors change, where a ward councillor now has the opportunity to speak at the beginning and the end. And of course, he's not part of that debate. What that means to me is I can now take part in the debate outside the chamber, in amongst my community, and allow them to know how I feel. Whereas before, because of predetermination, I in fact felt that I was alienated, but I couldn't tell my community how I felt. And if they come to me, it's very difficult to form a conversation. So I welcome these new rules, and to me, it feels as though it's freeing it all up, and I can now say more than I could before. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, I very much agree with what very experienced Councillor Goodridge has said in respect of this, and others criticising the increase of the in the number of people that are required to object in order to get automatic call-in. And we did have a surprise briefing last week, which I know a lot of members weren't able to make or weren't even aware of. And we were told there that this would not have any effect on residents. I find that stunning. It is blindingly obvious to anyone that if you get half of the number of applications going in front of a planning committee for scrutiny in public and scrutiny by the members, if the number is reduced by half, then you are getting worse planning decisions. If the number is reduced by half, you are going to find that a lot more decisions are going to be made mistakenly granting consent. We know that officers don't get things right all the time because inspectors do allow grant decisions where they've been overturned, where the officers' recommendations were overturned. And similarly, we know that councillors don't get it right all the time. But the problem that we've got is that only developers can appeal; the residents can't. So it is our job to be biased effectively in favour of the residents that we represent, because our officers' job is to get development through, and obviously the planning inspectorate's job is to try and get as much development as possible through, and that's why we don't get a right, and residents don't get a right to repeal. But I've got a big problem with this, which is that we have a scheme of community, statement of community involvement, SCI, which we've got adopted, which states in there that residents have the right to call in with over 5 objections, and we haven't changed that. That comes first. This isn't which comes first, the chicken or the egg. It's quite obvious that that our deal with which was done under consultation with residents, deal with residents in the SCI comes above the Constitution, because the Constitution and scheme of delegation are there in order to achieve our aims and achieve what we've agreed with the residents. So we can't do this. I would like to therefore at the end suggest that I propose a motion to simply add into the in the words to say subject to full council's agreement to make such changes to the SCI. So this doesn't start until residents have been consulted if necessary. We need to find out whether they do need to be consulted on this change, but certainly when it's been through proper scrutiny, because this hasn't had proper scrutiny. Page 135 refers to area committees. It's out of date already. There are 100 questions that need to be asked about this. What is it retrospective? Because I know we've got a lot of things, East Street, Brambleton Avenue, things where they might now not be called in unless we act. We want to know what doesn't this apply to and what does this apply to. We've been told that lots of things need to be regularised. At the last executive meeting, the leader said that there are a number of decisions which need to be regularised. What are those decisions? We need to know what things have been done wrong before we give greater powers for people to bypass our scrutiny, which is what this is asking for. It's certainly that there are great worries in what has been put forward here. And I think this has to wait, simply because actually we do not have the right to change this without changing the SCI at the same time. They have to be brought forward together. There's no justification for this, as we already have a very good scheme of delegation up to 98%.
Thank you indeed. Thank you indeed. Councillor Ward, you're next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Since I was at the Standards Committee, I hope my memory coincides with some of the other members, but I certainly support 2 of the points raised by Councillor Goodrich. One about consultation with the chair, which I was very keen on. I've just discussed it with Fiona, who assures me it is actually in the scheme of delegation and there is an error in the tracked changes. So if that is true, we should both be fairly happy, and I'm sure it is, we should both be fairly happy. I also agree with Councillor Goodrich that if you are a millisecond late for the start of a debate, or if you have a sudden urge or need to leave the chamber during it, I am quite happy for you to be debarred from voting, but I don't think that should prohibit you from giving your opinion on something which may well be very valid. So if Councillor Goodrich wishes to propose an amendment to that, I would most certainly second it. Training is an interesting one, and I'm glad Councillor Clark raised it because it wasn't on my list of things to talk about. Only about 2 of you, if that, will actually remember. For 3 years, I sat up here chairing planning and vice chairing planning. And at that time, having joint training was a great passion of mine, to the extent that I upset many officers. But we had training sessions for officers and we had training sessions for members, and they were given by the same person. And we met a day or two later, and we both heard very different things, rather like Prince Harry and Prince William, really. So what we got told and what went in our ears and came out again was quite different. And then I pleaded that we should have joint sessions of training with officers and councillors in the same room at the same time with the same trainer. I think this will be a hugely beneficial thing in improving relationships between officers and councillors and making sure that we all actually hear the same thing. So I very much support that. As I say, the chairman thing, I am told by Fiona, is okay. It is just an error in track changes. So I'm glad about that. And the not being able to speak, if Councillor Goodrich wishes to propose an amendment, I would second it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At previous meetings, including the Standards Committee meeting, I have expressed considerable opposition to the proposals which, in my view, reduce the role of elected councillors in the planning process in this borough. The single planning committee approach and this new scheme of delegation before us tonight, sadly, in my view, do just that. They represent a diminution of local democracy in local planning, and I remain opposed and will vote against the recommendations before us. I believe it's wrong to scrap the area local planning committees where councillors have taken balanced decisions based upon their local knowledge and the benefit of the local context. Councillors have more inquiries from members of the public about planning matters than
Councillor
any other
Martin,
topic.
one moment. I'm just
Madam Chair.
interrupting you for a moment. Councillor Follows, what is your point of order?
Point of order. Bear with me one moment, Madam Mayor. I believe on the item of the constitution regarding full council meetings, I've lost the right one. Under Article 4, essentially, that item that Councillor Martin is referred to isn't on the agenda. He's talking about the area planning committees and they're not on the agenda.
Thank you. The monitoring officer agrees. Councillor Martin, do you want to resume, but not with that?
Yes, thank you. I can. I believe it's wrong to take ward councillors, take out ward councillors from discussions and voting on planning applications concerning their own ward. This is surely what councillors were actually elected to do.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Follows.
The functions and powers of ward councillors are not on the agenda. Outside of speaking, anyway, the establishment of councillors voting or not on their committees was established by another full council and is therefore not on the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, could you limit yourself to what is on the procedural rules?
I will do
please?
my best, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much indeed. I would just draw members' attention to the last sentence of paragraph 3.1 on page 86 of the agenda papers, which says that the revised scheme of delegation aims to ensure that the planning committee's time is spent on considering applications of strategic importance to the local authority. It seems to me that the intent is clear. This administration wants to reduce the role of councillors in planning matters to the bare minimum. I believe it's wrong to make it more difficult for councillors to call in planning applications. I think it's wrong that the decision on that should rest with the head of planning, albeit with consultation with the chairman of planning. I believe that that decision should rest with an elected councillor, and most logically, the chairman of planning, who would doubtless then seek guidance from the head of planning. So, Madam Mayor, I do not believe that these recommendations are good, and I will be voting against them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do think that some of the recommendations are certainly being misunderstood. My ward in Badshot-Lee and Moore Park has characteristics of built-up areas, and it has characteristics where, yeah, you'd struggle to get 2 or 3 letters of objection from a neighbour, let alone 10. But that is not going to stop my residents contacting me where they have a concern about an application, and it's not going to stop me calling it in if I think that's appropriate. It will improve the quality of the discussion with the additional time to bring things in and consult with planning officers and with colleagues to make sure that the objections aren't wide of the mark, as they sometimes can be, that they are valid. And I'm glad to see that there is an emphasis on valid objections here. We're told countless times that it's not a numbers game. It is about valid and appropriate objections and valid and appropriate debate, regardless of whether you think that the planning grounds that are set for us are the best that they could be. So I'm glad. I do think that this will improve the quality of decisions. It will certainly allow for more quality engagement. It is a concern to some of my residents, particularly those who live in less dense areas. And I have done and will continue to do what I can to reassure them that it is not going to impede my ability to help them. It will actually improve my ability to help them, and so the outcomes will be better. I'd just like to add my acknowledgement and support to the contribution by Councillor Goodridge, because I do agree that it may be just there is the appearance that officers too often are unprepared for their recommendations to be overturned by a committee. I understand that we have to operate within a framework and reports have to be written in a certain way. It is frustrating for me that reports sometimes don't seem to offer a balance of the pros and cons that I would like to see in them. And I think that's a frustration that's shared by a lot of residents and leads to a lot of unnecessary confusion about what the process is. And I'd like to see us better prepared to have contrary recommendations if the committee feels that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to clarify that this document actually expands powers, decision-making powers of councillors, because there's no longer only that 21 days where you have to frantically look through the weekly list, especially if you've been on holiday, frantically look through, frantically then call things in, perhaps without having time to absorb all the information on the application. This gives you've got the entire period of time throughout the application to actually call this in with a valid planning reason. Now, I'm not sure, Councillor Hyman's talking about having 10 or 20 objections. But if there is a valid planning reason, one valid planning reason to call in an application, you can do it. You're not reliant on objections. Within those objections, one objection, two objection, if there's a valid planning reason that a resident has come up with or you have come up with yourself, then you can call the application in. It isn't reliant on a number. It's not like there's a magic number. If you've got 10, all of a sudden there's a valid planning reason because there's 10 objections. I think it's really important that you look through the application, come up with your reason, and what you can do is speak to the case officer as well, share your concerns, speak to the head of planning development as well. If you are concerned about an application, absolutely. But if you spot one on a weekly list from last week, you're not thinking, oh my goodness, I've only got 14 days left to actually talk about this and to absorb the information. Councillor Martin, I mean, listen, we are judged against government planning targets for overturns. If we weren't judged on those targets for overturns, if we weren't judged all the time on targets for different things, there might be more ability to perhaps look at having a whole different raft of planning committees, whatever you like. But unfortunately, the quality of planning decisions, overturns of those planning decisions on appeal count to our targets and risk us losing control of our planning decision making. So we have every single bit of PAS advice tonight you seem to have disagreed with. We are taking advice from experts, planning advisory service experts, funded by your government actually, and they are advising that this is a positive step forward to make sure that our councillors aren't accused of predetermination, to give our ward councillors the real position to speak to their residents without thinking, oh, am I going to be thinking I might be predetermined if I'm on the planning committee? You can speak freely to your residents. You can represent your residents' view. You've got 4 minutes at the beginning, 4 minutes at the end to do that. And I think it's actually a real expansion of our powers and a freedom from being tied down to that risk of being predetermined. So I think, you know, this is something, again, we're doing this for a year trial. Don't forget when we took on the one planning committee, it was for a year's trial. We are trying something to see whether or not that improves as well our performance. So I think it's something to be embraced. I think we need to be looking forward on things, not looking backwards all the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, as a point, I wanted to make a point of personal explanation in accordance with the Constitution, if I may. And that is in respect of my position was dismissed by the portfolio holder on the grounds that if you've got valid planning reasons, you are safe and everything's happy. The reality, of course, is that the officers and lawyers and all the advice that members received from 2007 through to 2018 and since continues to fail to abide by the law and respect the law. That's what the decision is, a fact, plain fact, that's what the decision in People Over Wind told us, that all the decisions were made unlawfully, all the advice was incorrect.
Thank you, Councillor
And because
Hyman.
of that,
thank you.
we
I'm
require
moving
a
on
duty
now
of
to
candour.
Councillor Goodridge.
We don't have a duty of candour.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Goodridge.
The Deputy Mayor had invited me to make an amendment, and I proposed to make one. And the amendment is in two parts as follows. In the procedure rules, paragraph 2.3, delete the words, quote, take part in the debate and, end of quote, which is on page 105. And in the Planning Code of Good Practice, paragraph 22.4, delete the words, take part in the committee discussion, debate and, end of quote, page 125. I have written out a copy, or at least I'm writing out my other copy, which I can hand you. I hope I have a seconder.
After due consideration, I will second that.
Madam Mayor, I have very little to say in favour of that amendment, save that I've already spoken on it, in that if you are late, you can't vote, but you should be able to take part in the discussion and the debate. And that's all these amendments are saying. Thank you.
So we have a proposed amendment. Councillor Follows.
Just to add, I completely support what's said there. Don't believe there's anything controversial in that. And actually, I think it establishes what the committee actually meant during their discussions anyway. So happy to support.
Councillor MacLeod.
Also happy to support, Madam Chairman.
So does anybody want to debate that at all? Councillor Hyman.
Only obviously that I support this amendment, but it will make no difference unless we have a duty of candour. On the wall, we have the requirements of honesty and leadership.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. So are all those in favour of that amendment proposed and seconded, please show. Thank you. To sum up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't have too much to say, but I would like to comment on one or two things that have been said in the vote. Thank you very much to Councillor Goodrich for his intervention. In terms of this issue of number of objections, which seems to be quite a difficult issue. Just I'd like to point out this was fully debated at the Standards Committee, and I actually therefore have to stick with the recommendation of the Standards Committee that we should stick with the 10 objections or 20 objections required. We will be reviewing this, as Councillor Townsend said, after a year to see how well it worked. But it shouldn't, in my opinion, really be a problem in that ward councillors can actually call into the committee if they feel it's necessary or they feel it's justified. And I don't see that. I see that as almost totally overcoming the problem if the ward councillors are doing their job. Actually, we don't actually want, on the other hand, things coming to the committee with 15 objections from people who don't have a valid planning reason. If that requires us to have extra planning committee meetings, extra officer time wasted in that, because they're not actually valid planning reasons that have caused the committee to have to meet. So I would actually recommend to the council that they stick with what the officers are recommending, what the chief planning officer has recommended. And apart from that, I would now ask the committee to agree with the standard committee recommendations as modified by Councillor Goodrich. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Yes, please, we have an opinion.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to clarify for councillors on page 98 of Appendix 1, which is the scheme of delegations, which is the clean copy, just to confirm that the words "in consultation with the chair of the planning committee" are indeed in there. So it's simply an error on the track change version in Appendix 1B, but that consultation provision is definitely in there.
Thank you. So with that clarification and with the recommendations, 4 of them as amended, are you happy to take the 4 recommendations together? Yes. And would you like to vote electronically again? Fiona, yes, may we?
Thank you. So that's 32 in favour, 2 abstentions and 10 against.
Thank you, Fiona. So that is carried. We come to agenda item number 12, appointment of members to committees. So do you note the updated committee memberships that have been completed by the Executive Head of Legal and Democratic Services under delegated authority and in line with group leaders' wishes following the agreement of the committee structure at the council meeting on the 7th of June?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. And well, that was for noting, so I'll take that. And also to agree the chair and vice chair of the planning committee as David Beeman, Councillor Beeman, and myself. Thank you. There are no motions as agenda item number 13. So that's unlucky for some. Agenda item number 14. There is a recommendation that the minutes of the executive meetings held on the 4th of April, 11th of May and 6th of June be received and noted. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And I have Councillor Gale who would like to speak on one of the minutes. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yes, it's on the minutes of the executive held on the 4th of April. I actually asked a question because I'm concerned about the reduction of monies towards SANG in Waverley. The leader actually did respond to me and he advised that he was happy to add this to the forward plan, which was to make it an 80-year. And he said also that he noted that the up and coming elections meant he was not able to give any further commitments, but he was sure the matter that any future executive would want to explore. So could I ask, are you exploring?
Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Constantly, Councillor Gout. No, it's going to be on the agenda for our exec brief session in September, at which point we will put something more formally onto the executive when there's a resolution, but I'll keep you updated. And thank you. Thank you for reminding me of my pre-election promises.
Always good. Agenda item 15 then, the minutes of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee, and I move the recommendation that the minutes of those committees, that committee held on 27th of February, be received and noted. Is that agreed? Thank you. Agenda item number 16, minutes of the Audit Committee. So I move the recommendation that the minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 13th of March be received and noted. Is that agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 17, minutes of the Standards and General Purposes Committee. I move the recommendation that the minutes of the Standards and General Purposes Committee meetings held on 30th of November 2022 and 7th of June this year be received and noted. Is that agreed? Fantastic. So that concludes the meeting of the full council, and I wish you all a safe journey home and a good evening, what's rest of it. So thank you.